Time for the 49ers. It's draft time for the 49ers. More importantly, it's off-season time for the 49ers. Me and Sunil, we've got a lot of interesting topics to talk about, talking about how we approach free agency, the draft, and really what makes a Super Bowl team for the 49ers in 2023. All after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? We see Sunil dancing up on there. He
Bro,
likes
your
the
intro video is fire. I love it every time I get to hear it.
Hey, that's how it is. Shout out to the guy, Jesse Naylor, obviously, the mastermind behind the graphics there. So appreciate you for tuning in. But guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in. We've got a fun show today. Sunil, how you doing, man?
Doing as good as possible, man. We in the thick of the off season, usually when football season is over, obviously 30 teams or 31 teams are disappointed. Only one fan base is excited. And fortunately, we're on the other end of the excitement. So it is what it is. Now we're looking towards the future, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's how it is. As soon as we lost in the NFC Championship game, it's just you turn the switch, flip the switch, you go on to the next thing because you've got something else to talk about now. So a lot definitely going on, but that's what we're here for. That's what we're here to break down. So we've got off-season talk, but Sunil, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with let's start with free agency. Let's start with free agency and let's talk about kind of this roster as is.
Yo, Rohan, how about for another offseason, we're going to be dominated with who the starting quarterback should be for the 49ers. Isn't that amazing?
No, not really. I saw it in the script 6 years ago. So I've known for a while. I've known as soon as we hired Kyle Shanahan that this was going to be the issue, that we were going to have quarterback situation after quarterback situation, that we'd go from Brian Hoyer to Jimmy Garoppolo, not Patrick Mahomes, and then we'd end up here. So I've envisioned this for the last how many ever years, man.
Yo, you should have told me. You should have given me a heads up about that Nick Mullins section because that's the one that really threw me for a wrench.
I know, and I mean, it was kind of cool seeing the UCL section just like run it back pretty much. That was sad, but no, talking real now. It's definitely a new situation for the 49ers. Somehow they're stuck in a quarterback conundrum for what is this, the third consecutive offseason? 2020, you had Jimmy Garoppolo there coming off the Super Bowl loss where, he missed the throw. Tom Brady rumors were there, and the 49ers elected to stick with Garoppolo. 2021, you trade 3 first-round picks up after failing to acquire Matthew Stafford, after failing to acquire a bridge quarterback to potentially move on, and then trade 3 first-round picks, only for Garoppolo to remain the starter. And then in 2022, it's Trey Lance, but then Garoppolo returns at the end of the training camp period, and then Garoppolo ends up being the starter. I mean, not starter. He ends up starting games, though, after Lance's injury, and then Purdy, and now the UCL. So we're back at it again, full circle. Lance and Purdy this time. Obviously, we don't know the severity yet, or we know the severity, but we don't know the timeline yet of Brock Purdy's injury. And really, we won't know as the offseason goes along if there's anything going on there. So it'll definitely be an interesting storyline to follow. But there's also so much on this 49ers team, apart from just the quarterback position, although the quarterback position is one that the 49ers will definitely target this offseason, be it in the free agency or the draft.
Yeah, so I kind of want to run it back a little bit because
let's do it.
I want to talk a little bit, and if it's okay with you, what I learned from the Super Bowl game that kind of is going to focus in on how I want the 49ers to approach this offseason, whether it be free agency, draft, and so on and so forth. Because I think there were some big takeaways that actually changed maybe some of my perspective on what the focus should be. So I don't know if you remember from last offseason, Rohan, and I think you were on a similar page to me. I thought there was this big concern about the offensive line, and I thought I was on the side of the offensive line will be fine. I thought that they would be adequate, even a bit above average, which I think ultimately they proved. I think the 49ers offensive line was one of the better offensive lines throughout the season. But what I learned from the Super Bowl is that there's a different level to what a dominant offensive line looks like from just a pretty good offensive line. And for me, that's one thing that I realize is a dominant offensive line changes the trajectory of your team. It gives especially a dominant offensive line with a quarterback that could get the ball out quick. You could negate a dominant defensive line, right? So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway that I took as far as Um, personnel is now I really want to see upgrades from the offensive line to where we could take a next level. I don't think we could come in as standard operating procedure. Like the offensive line can't be the same as it was last season. It has to be better. Otherwise, I don't know if we take that next leap.
Right. And one other thing that I want to point out when we talk about the offensive line, real quick, do want to give a shout out to the two people that saw. Bryant, thank you for tuning in. 49ers Podcast Network, thank you for tuning in. But one thing I do want to point out about the offensive line, the reason why it's so tough to make a Super Bowl, the reason why it's so tough to construct such an elite offensive line is because offensive linemen are not let go. You don't see good offensive linemen hit free agency. You don't see good offensive linemen hit the market. Why? Because teams understand how rare it is to have a strong offense. They're not 30 good centers in like 30 above average centers in the NFL.
Right.
No, there may be a good crop of maybe 10, maybe 8 to 10. Same with right tackle, maybe 8 to 10 that you can win a Super Bowl with. Some other positions, maybe not, but receiver, there are 60 good receivers, 60 top receivers that really you could win with. Maybe there are a lot of good teams where you see Brandon Ayuk, for example, on our team could be a receiver one on another team, and things like that. So when you talk about it, I think that when you talk about the offensive line, it's important to note how teams build their offensive line strongly. The Kansas City Chiefs, they had a couple of big signings. They pounced when people became available in Orlando Brown, their left tackle, and Joe Tooney, their left guard. They spent money there for both. Well, spent capital for Orlando Brown, who will require a big time deal this offseason, and spent money for Joe Tooney. But they drafted Creed Humphrey, one of the best, if not the best, centers in the NFL, and they drafted their right guard as well in Trey Smith. And then in the Philadelphia Eagles, who have the best offensive line in football, they drafted Jordan Mailata, they drafted Lane Johnson, they drafted Landon Dickerson, they drafted Jason Kelsey, and I'm not exactly sure if they drafted Isaac Seumalo or not, but he was a guy who they developed as well. They have a strong group, and it really comes via the draft. And normally when you get these talents, it's near the first round, near the second round, in higher rounds, because you're not necessarily good that year, or you pounce on players falling, because offensive line is a commodity. The teams always will overreach for tackle over overreaching for some other positions like maybe safety, because of how important it is. So I agree. I think that you have to have a strong offensive line to win Super Bowls, to win football games, but you also have to understand how that strong offensive line comes to fruition and how tough really it is to really command that strong offensive line.
So, if you don't mind, Rohan, I'd like to focus in on that because you made a great point that I think gets overlooked a lot. The level of talent on these offensive linemen, I think there's this narrative that you could find a good offensive lineman in the 5th, 6th, 7th round, and they can, go out and be, play at a level that's elite. And, Jordan Mailata is somebody that would fit that narrative. He was a late round draft pick that ended up being like one of the better tackles in the league. But that's not accurate, right? It's usually first and second round guys that end up being, the stalwarts of the offensive line. And, even if you look at the 49ers, I think for me, I used to look at them and be like, they're not very good at picking offensive linemen in the first rounds because, obviously McGlinchey, the fan base is kind of out on McGlinchey, but McGlinchey is a top 10 right tackle, right? He's going to probably be the highest paid
Yeah.
right tackle out of this free agency class. So he didn't, and obviously he is really good in run blocking, but isn't the best necessarily in pass blocking. But overall, as far as compared to other right tackles, you can do a lot worse than him. And then if you look at the other two, I think stalwarts on our offensive line, obviously Trent Williams, who's a first round draft pick, and Aaron Banks, who's a second round draft pick. So those three, we
Yep.
actually had the makings of what could be a really good offensive line because we had 3 out of the 5 in first or second round talent. Now, I think both you and agree that McGlinchey's probably gone. He's going to be too expensive for what the 49ers are going to afford or spend on their offensive line. But this is kind of what my mentality is because do you agree with me that they do need to upgrade? Like they can't just putting Colton McKivitz in at right tackle isn't gonna make them closer to a Super Bowl. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I agree in that I think that if you don't re-sign Mike McGlinchey, your right tackle will not upgrade it likely in 2022. I don't think that there's an upgrade if you don't go and get a free agent.
Got you. So that's where I think my strategy would be. And I know you said what free agents. I think if we could focus maybe on specific groups, how we
Let's do
solve
it.
that, and
Yeah.
we'll start with the offensive line. So what my strategy would be, and this actually comes from a lot from your input, is that originally when we first initially earlier this off season or last off season or earlier in the year, your thought process was Spencer Burford ultimately was going to be the right tackle of the future for the 49ers. And he obviously showed some promise at right guard, but definitely needed some room for improvement. But he's been a tackle his whole senior year. He was a tackle in high school, mostly on the left side, but he has the frame, he has the size, and now a little bit of experience in the NFL, where I think that ideally moving him to right tackle would give the 49ers the best options to actually upgrade, because I do think that you could find some free agents that you could bring in at a reasonable cost, which would be less than a right guard less than a right tackle at the right guard position, to really maybe solidify the right side with Burford at tackle, bring in a free agent right guard that you can put there and not have to do like the rotation like they did last season, and then either draft or bring back Brendel, or once again based off of your analysis, maybe Zakil if he's ready. I think that ideally that would be what I would want. Like have move Burford to right tackle, bring in a free agent right guard, because I do think there's some available that fit age wise, prime wise, that could be in the 49ers budget, and then either bring Brendel back or move Zakil into that. And I think that could have the potential, at least upside, to elevate the offensive line, which I do think is needed this offseason.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely intriguing points that you make, and I want to go back to your philosophy where you talk about how the first round picks, second round picks, obviously have a higher hit rate. I think the offensive line, I think it matters even more than other positions because of how important it is. In that the reason that teams take offensive linemen and specifically tackles in the first and second round is because they project better and they have a higher floor than potentially the late round picks. Because when you have a higher floor, you're able to be inserted into the lineup immediately, and that provides you at least a starting caliber option at a position likely devoid of much talent. But when you go to the fourth, fifth, and sixth round and draft offensive linemen, it takes this period of development. They're not necessarily as refined unless there's a medical concern like there was with Trey Smith. They're not as refined. Jordan Mailata wasn't necessarily refined when he first
Mm-hmm.
started. It takes development. And so there's this level of patience that is required. But some teams like the 49ers, maybe like the Eagles and like like the Cincinnati Bengals, perhaps, they don't have that level of patience because they're looking at the window right now. And so that's where you create this conundrum of trying to develop players while also trying to compete right now. That's why the 49ers essentially redshirted players like Nick Stakel, redshirted players like Jason Poe to potentially prepare them for this season while having a stopgap option like Jake Brendel, who by all means could 100% return, and I've actually advocated for it. But you know you have the stopgap option, a guy who you believe can play until you develop other guys that were drafted in later rounds to potentially fill that role and play a similar play at a level similar to those. On the Spencer Burford right tackle topic, I think it's intriguing. I've said it before earlier this season. I don't think I'm as bullish on the idea, though, as I was earlier in the season. I do think that Burford still requires a good amount of refinement, and I think that it might make it the learning process a little harder if you move him to right tackle. I do believe that his potential, he could be a very high caliber player in terms of his potential if he was a right tackle, but I do also think the 49ers prioritize the floor. And I think his floor might be higher at right guard given the familiarity at the position and moving positions, switching positions once again after adjusting to the NFL in year one might have a little bit of a longer learning curve, which I don't know if the 49ers can necessarily afford if they're trying to have this championship window, which is why you see the reports that they're potentially grooming Colton McKivitz, a guy who essentially spent this entire last year playing tackle after flip flopping positions. He is the guy who they're grooming to potentially start at right tackle.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's enough. I mean, we've seen McKivitz, and McKivitz is a serviceable player. He's somebody who's come in spot duty in big games, right? Namely, 2 years ago against the Rams in week, I think it was 18 or something like that, where he came in when Trent Williams was out, and he played decent against the Rams in a must-win game that ended up being the game that got the 49ers into the playoffs. But long term, even stopgap for a year, does that help? And I don't know if it does, because I don't think whomever the starting quarterback is, whether it's Purdy, whether it's Lance, I think that when you go up against dominant defensive lines like the Eagles, like I think the Chiefs would be, like, I'm looking at it from the perspective of to win a Super Bowl, right? That's my right now at this point. That's what I'm looking for. How do we get this team to win a Super Bowl? I don't know if McKivitz, Burford, Zakeel, Banks, and Williams is a good enough offensive line. I want to give a name to you, and you tell me. I don't know if you know much about this player,
Go
but
for it.
let's say if we do right tackle Burford, Ben Powers,
Okay.
guard out of Baltimore, has played both left guard and right guard. 27 years old,
Right.
probably be 8 or 9 million a year. But if we could move him into right guard, and whether it be Zakil or Brendel at center, him at right guard, and then Burford, to me, I think that can give you the opportunity, because you have a good, reliable veteran player there in the middle of two players that are learning. And I think that that's where we can actually see an elevated level of play from the offensive line in that type of situation. What would you think about that? And Ben Powers is just a guy that I look at, because I know the Ravens are a very run first type team. So he would be somebody who I think could and he's used to having a scrambling quarterback. So he's used to, playing in a probably similar type system as the 49ers. But I just think right guard, you could find a veteran that is more of an upgrade. What would you think about a strategy like that? Do you think that could elevate the offensive line to the point that it significantly changes the 49ers' ability to make it to a Super Bowl?
Ben Powers is intriguing. He's a solid player. I just think one of two things. One, I don't think it's necessarily realistic because the 49ers showed last year in the Lake and Tomlinson news that really they don't prioritize guards as much as they prioritize tackles. And so I think that and centers as well. I think they'd be more incentivized to put out money for a center or a tackle than they would be for a guard. And Ben Powers is likely going to command a high salary and should be in high demand on the market, which might price him out really of San Francisco's range. On top of that, Powers, I'm assuming, is going to likely look to play left guard because that's where he had his strongest season and where he could likely command the most money going into the offseason after playing a really good year in 2022 at left guard. So I'm assuming that he's preferring left guard, and I don't know if it would be the smartest move to move a guy who had been playing strongly at left guard to right guard after paying him $10 million a year. I understand the versatility. That's just where I'm coming from in terms of I don't know how realistic the move is from the 49ers sense. And the last part I'd say is Baltimore is definitely a run first scheme, which is why Powers would be intriguing as a run blocker, but he's also more capable in a in a power run scheme rather than a zone run scheme. That's what Baltimore runs and has at least has run under Greg Roman. And I know the concepts can also obviously be um, like complementary to each other, but I don't know necessarily if it's the best scheme fit and also the best position fit for the amount of money that you have to put out for him.
So, what would be a realistic path to upgrading this? Because do you agree? Let's say if they stand pat, if the 49ers are going to just do what they're going to do, which is McKivitz, Burford, let's say Zakeel, Banks, and then Williams. Are you looking at that offensive line does anything to get the 49ers closer to the Super Bowl?
I don't think so necessarily. I don't think so, but I have to view it in two ways. One, what's realistic, and two, you have to understand also with the situation that the 49ers are in and an unwillingness, not necessarily an unwillingness, but I don't know if it's as smart if you could just continuously push $60 million into the back year after year because it just hurts you financially. And you see teams like the Saints trying to get out of that situation and then essentially hurting their roster by losing key players. I don't know if that's the smartest way. So to me, I think it's you have to figure out a way to upgrade the roster, but within the confines of what you have right now. And understanding that offensive line is a position where if you look to in free agency, you're likely going to overpay. I think the smartest way to try and upgrade the offensive line is what I said earlier. It's in the draft. In the draft this year, there are several mid-round kind of tackles that I think intrigue me. I've watched guys like Wanya Morris. There's guys like Jalen Duncan, Matthew Bergeron, guys who you can go and potentially even trade up for, given that teams normally do reach for tackles. Potentially you can trade up for because you have the capital to do so. And I think it's a position you should address. Colton McKivitz, he is getting closer towards free agency, and I don't think he's going to command a high salary, but you want some competition there. Jalen Moore is in good competition. He's not a good tackle. He's more of a guard. I've said that since he got drafted, and it's been proven. And so I think that Moore shouldn't be your backup tackle, and I think you should instead go for a rookie and see who you can develop there, because the point is you're trying to find out who you can what the solution is at right tackle for the future. And if I do think that you should provide Spencer Burford with some reps at right tackle to see the comfortability, to see how that flows. But I also think you should draft a tackle, maybe even a player who's played right tackle predominantly in the NFL, to provide McKivitz some ample competition, some younger competition, and potentially even find the solution for your future. I think that there are a couple of guys in the second round, in the late second round, and in the third round, second, third round range that you could find that the 49ers, those are realistic options that the 49ers could target and they could go after and potentially look to upgrade in that way. You're not going to there if you like I said earlier, if you don't re-sign Mike McGlinchey, you're not going to upgrade this offensive line drastically this offseason. It's just not possible, because if you're not re-signing Mike McGlinchey, you're not going to go after a starting level, or not a starting level, but a high priced right tackle on the open market. And I think that the 49ers are also set with three of the positions, the two guard positions and the left tackle position. While the center, I do believe Jake Brendel can be brought back for a relatively cheaper price than what people might expect from a Pro Bowl alternate. So I think that those four positions, if you do re-sign Brendel and then have Nick Zakel and Jason Poe compete there, or if you don't re-sign Brendel and have Zakel and Poe compete there, I think that you solve the right tackle position by having McKivitz compete with a rookie. I think that that's the most realistic situation given the 49ers cap situation and also the needs at other positions, which we'll address soon.
Yeah, I guess for me right now, I prioritize the offensive line as a must upgrade. And from what from your plan of action, which is the most reasonable route, I think we're saying that the 49ers can't win a Super Bowl next year.
I don't think so. I mean, we'll get to that soon, and we'll get to that soon, because you have to understand the 49ers are dealing with this situation, but they're not the only team dealing with this situation. When we talk about the amount of talent that the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles are going to lose this offseason because of how they're going to be outpriced on the open market, you have to understand teams have to capitalize on their windows. It's not like teams can consistently. I'm not saying teams can't consistently be good, but you have to consistently find ways to replace talent and to figure out how to draft. And really, it's coming down to how efficiently can you draft. And if we're talking about upgrading the offensive line or keeping an offensive line that can be a top 10 unit, I mean, there is a solution on the board. We're talking as if Mike McGlinchey will not be retained, but the solution on the board is to retain him. I mean, if you want to have continuity and try and keep an offensive line at that caliber, I think the solution would be to retain him or to likely go after. I mean, if the number one option could be Caleb McGarry, a guy from the Atlanta Falcons who's a year younger. The option that I'd say is a dark horse is Jawan Taylor, a guy from the Jacksonville Jaguars who's only 25, still has potential, and is a strong run blocker and a developing pass protector, but a good had a solid pass protecting season this past year. He's only 25, and he could see a Travarius Ward-esque deal. The issue is the tackles are likely going to get a good amount of competition. They're going to have a high market, and that's where the 49ers need to decide, are we going to do we want to overpay for a tackle and put ourselves into that situation for the next 3 to 4 years? Because if they don't want to do that and they prefer to go a different route, then you're going to see a guy like Colton McKivitz or maybe even a rookie end up being the starting right tackle. And I think it's also important to understand that when we look at the formulas of the Super Bowl teams, they have strong offensive lines, but we also need to know, like, it's strong offensive lines are very valuable. They are also arguably the second most valuable thing behind a strong quarterback. But you have to understand that the 49ers also are within their confines and can also shown the success without necessarily elite caliber tackle play or elite caliber offensive line play before. And when you talk about this unit that will improve at certain positions in terms of Aaron Banks will likely get another year, Burford should improve, and things like that. You could see some improvements from a unit that was already a top 14-ish unit, maybe even top 10 unit in 2022.
So let's say that we go with your thought process. Keep Burford at guard. So we have three positions solidified with Burford at right guard, Banks at left guard, and obviously Williams at left tackle. So center and right tackle right now are up for grabs, right? Out of
Yeah.
those two positions, which is more realistic to be able to upgrade through free agency? And which one's more realistic that we have an upgrade already on the roster?
Upgrade is it's a tough word, right? Because it is sometimes tough to upgrade. I mean, it will be tough to upgrade if you're looking to try and upgrade a Pro Bowl alternate player in Jake Brendel. And I'm not going to say Jake Brendel's a Pro Bowl player. I don't believe that myself, but it's going to be tough to upgrade because, I mean, if you talk about the top centers on the market, a lot of them, I mean, it's questionable, really, as to where you'd necessarily go. And so, to me, I think that, I mean, what I would do is I would re-sign Jake Brendel and have him compete with Nick Sakel and have him compete with Jason Poe at that center spot. Why? Because you already know what you have in Jake Brendel. He's somewhat of a known commodity now. You've seen the level of play that he can have. If one of those two young guys I know the 49ers can believe that Nick Sakel can be their center of the future. I've had that belief since he was drafted as well. If you can show that he's the guy, if he plays better than Brendel, then you have good confidence in that guy going forward. I'd assume that could be the plan at center.
What
I
kind of
personally,
contract would you give to Brendel? Because here's the thing when it comes to free agency that we're going to have a problem with throughout is right now there's four other teams in the league that know the 49ers personnel really well as well, right? There's
yeah.
the Texans, there's Miami, there's the Jets, and now the Titans as well, that all are going to be looking to pick guys from the 49ers. So what kind of contract would you give to Brendel? Because if he's in competition, you probably don't want to sign him to a long-term type thing because obviously you're looking for the Zakil or whatever to beat them out and be the long-term solution. So how do you find that happy medium where you're able to retain him, but also not be tied to him?
In that sense, it'd be. I mean, obviously, it'd be a shorter term deal. I'd assume a deal worth maybe 1 to 2 years. I'd say, but the guaranteed money would all be pretty much confined to that 1 year, to the first year. I'd say a deal, maybe a 1 year $5 million deal, maybe a 2 year $10 million deal with, if it's 1.5, maybe I mean, I wouldn't mind if it's a 1.5, 1.4 fully guaranteed deal, and then if it's a 2.10 with 5 million guaranteed, something like that. I mean, I wouldn't mind that deal for a 30-year-old center. In that you essentially are guaranteeing 1 year of money. But again, it's how the 49ers want to go into the situation in terms of the center play. Like I said, I would bring him back. I think that he provides you a at least a known commodity at a position that you don't have known commodities as. And if someone beats him out, then you have a better option. If they don't beat him out, you have an option that you know that you can work with, and other options that you know that you can continue to develop.
Cool. Cool. Well, what was so? I think for me, I'm really emphasizing the offensive line. What do you think? What position group are you really emphasizing for the to see the kind of step forward you want to see from the 49ers?
That's a good question. I mean, to me, the top three positions in terms of building a Super Bowl caliber team that we've seen in the past, and for the 49ers philosophy: strong defensive line, strong offensive line, strong quarterback. The 49ers, they're going to have to figure out that quarterback situation. And if we'll talk about quarterback in a little bit in terms of what they can do. But offensive line, to me, I think that is very important. But I also think that you have to understand the way that teams normally build their offensive line, and how the 49ers are confined right now with the not only with the cap space that they have, but with the without the affinity to overpay for the position, and also with the draft potentially pairing out to have strong tackles in the second and third round. So to me, I would prioritize the defensive line. I think the defensive line took a step back in 2022. I'll be the first to say it. I was wrong. I thought this defensive line would be better than 2019. That's wrong. I thought that the amount of depth would overcome the amount of star talent that the team had in 2019. And no, instead, Nick Bosa he had the best year of his career, and Ark Armstead was still very capable when he was playing. But the supporting cast, while definitely flashing at times, Charles Omeni, who had a very good pass rusher win rate, he was a strong pass rusher, and I'd look for the 49ers to bring him back. But the remainder of the cast, Samson Ebukam, he was up and down as a pass rusher, good run defender, but up and down as a pass rusher. And the issue is, when you have so much depth, but not necessarily enough star talent, you're looking at who's on the field. The depth is cool, but it's the four that are on the field that are making the impact. And you need the impact to happen more and more often. The sacks weren't necessarily there this year. The pressure rate wasn't as high as you'd want it to be for a team predicated on a strong defensive line. That's where they're investing a lot of resources into. And so to me, I think that you need an improvement there. A couple of guys that I'd look at. I'd go for the defensive tackle position. I think that provides you a lot more value, because you can be versatile with your guys. Play them the one tech, play them the three tech, maybe even the five tech, with the way the 49ers like to interchange their defensive linemen. My number one guy would be Deron Payne. Deron Payne will be expensive, but he's young. He fits the 49ers formula. They've looked to go younger in free agency, and he's a three-down player. That's the thing with the 49ers. They have Ark Armstead and Nick Bosa. Both are three-down players, but they don't have many three-down players. They have guys that they rotate for pass rushing situations, for run stopping situations. And while it works, it creates sometimes unfavorable situations where you have guys stopping the run or rushing the passer when you want maybe another personnel in based on what the offense does. And so having those players that you can depend on, especially when it comes to the postseason, to make plays, I think that's extremely important. Deron Payne's a guy who can be a three-down player, has shown significant flash as a pass rusher, but also as a run stopper. I think that that's valuable. And defensive tackles, they're becoming more of a premium in the NFL. You're going to see teams look to prioritize that. Why? Because it's becoming a more pass happy league. So you want the guys up front to really create havoc. And in lighter boxes, because teams are playing a lot more of the nickel formation, you want the guys up front to be able to stop the run. And Deron Payne, that's something he can do. A pairing of him and Armstead takes pressure off of Armstead, and potentially some more double teams off of Armstead, allowing him to operate to where his contract stays essentially says so. And then you
Valuable.
have Yeah, exactly. And then have Deron Payne be there as well, a guy who can wreck the game. I think that he'd be valuable. Another guy who I think that showcased his talents this year was Javon Hargrave. He's a little older. He's already 30 years old, but I think he's been one of the more underrated players. And if the 49ers can get either at a good deal for the next few years, I'd definitely be happy with it.
I love the Deron Payne signing. Like that would be the dream. You know how like Charvarius Ward was the one big name that they brought in, or the one splurge that they brought in. If they're only bringing in one splurge, I'd want that splurge to be Deron Payne, because to me, you put Deron Payne, match them with um, Arik Armstead and Bosa. It doesn't really matter who the fourth option is there. You could rotate that other edge, and I think you'll be fine, because the 49ers are always able to develop that one other
Right.
player. And but the problem is Kinlaw has been not what we expected Kinlaw to be, right? He's a first round draft pick, top 15 draft pick that hasn't played anywhere close to that ability. And I think it's time to just give up on Kinlaw as far as depending on him in any type of way. And the way that you do that and rectify that is go out and pay somebody what you would have paid Kinlaw if he ended up becoming the player that you'd want him to be. So I think that's where Deron Payne comes in. Bring him in, kind of wash your hands with Kinlaw, and just be like, you know what, this guy didn't pan out the way that we wanted him to, but we still need that position to be settled. And to me, I think that solidifies your defensive line, where you can put minimum contract guys alongside those three players and be still a top defensive line in the league. In fact, even better than they were last season.
I agree. I mean, when you talk about Kinlaw, I'd be surprised, honestly, at this point if he's a starter for the 49ers next year. I think Kalia Davis, the rookie who was a sixth-round pick and essentially redshirted his freshman year because of a torn ACL, I think he's a better player, or I think he's at least going to show more than Javon Kinlaw when it comes to OTAs. He's got more explosiveness. He's got unique bend, and I think that he can provide more as well as a guy who can be there as a key reserve for the 49ers in 2023. Kinlaw, I think this is his last year in a 49er uniform, barring any unforeseen change in his level of play over his last year. I don't think that fifth year option gets picked up by any means. That's a lot of money, and I don't think the 49ers are going to put themselves without flexibility with Javon Kinlaw. It's really unfortunate how his career has gone because of the knee injuries, because of all the injuries he's encountered. But I don't think the 49ers should look to go into next season with Javon Kinlaw as their starter defensive tackle. There's still too many technical flaws, and with the not athletic issues, but with the injury issues alongside the technical flaws, it brings together a player who I'm not very confident in if he's the starter. But there are several options for the 49ers, and I think that the defensive line is where they should look to make that one splash. I think they'll make one splash for sure, but I think that one splash defensive line is where I'd look.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I don't know where the 49ers cap money is at. I know based off of from what I've heard from Jesse, right now they're what, like at 8 million or something like that. They
Yeah,
have
around
if
10.
they
Yeah.
if they do, a few of the younger guys that they could, mess with their contracts, like CMC,
Fred Warner would be one.
Warner, and let's say they do 3 contracts like that, they'll be at like 38 million. I
Yeah.
think Deron Payne probably is like going to be the most expensive, probably one of the more expensive defensive linemen there. So if they do, to me, I think both you and I agree that's like the number one choice. But let's say he gets priced out, he gets a big contract somewhere else, the 49ers aren't willing to pay him or can't pay him the type of money that would retain him. Another option I would look at, I know you said Hargrove, I think that would be a good like runner up, but maybe a guy like Yannick Ngakoue, bringing him in and solidifying the edge so that there's some help there for Bosa. Because we do have Kalia Davis, like you mentioned. Another guy that we could bring back that I think can show potential is Ridgeway. He's somebody who unfortunately was injured a lot this season as well, but he's somebody who can potentially be a tackle there that can be productive. But I do think we need 3 stars, and we have. I put Ark Armstead in that position of a star, even though his play is kind of teetering on that level. But we definitely have Bosa. I'll put Ark Armstead there. We need another guy that's as impactful. Obviously, Payne, like I said, that's number one choice. But do you think we could still upgrade if we bring in a guy like Yannick Ngakoue? Can that give us the push that we need also to be an elite defensive line?
This might be a hot take. I'm not as high on Yannick Ngakoue as a lot of people. I know a lot of people do like Yannick Ngakoue and have him as a top priority. I think, though, if the 49ers are going to shell out a lot of money, they should go with the philosophy that they've been going with when they're going to pay money, like guys like Bosa and Armstead. And that's players that are three-down guys. And I don't think Yannick Ngakoue profiles as a three-down guy. He hasn't been a very good run defender his entire career, wasn't in Indianapolis. He's a good pass rusher, a very good pass rusher by that, but he's a rotational piece, and that limits the defense because he isn't a good run defender, and you don't want him to play in run defense. And so to me, I don't know if I'd pay $15 million for a guy who just rushes the passer when you have a guy who was amongst the top in pass rush win rate in Charles Omenihu, who ends up being a fairly solid pass rusher for the limited role that he plays at a significantly cheaper salary. And so to me, that's kind of where I'm looking at when it comes to Yannick Ngakoue. I'm not as high. I would go for a player that's a three-down player, and I would
So
also
give us a name. Give
probably
us a name outside of
Javon
Deron Payne.
Javon Hargrave would be my second guy because he's a three-down player and he plays defensive tackle, which I think is a little bit of a tougher position to necessarily upgrade. I think defensive tackle, like I said, is going to become a premium because of how the league has become pass happy. I think he's a guy that you could look for. Some other guys that I may like. I know it was there, and I don't think New Orleans brings him back. Marcus Davenport would be interesting as defensive end. I think he'd be a little cheaper if you're looking for those pass rush type of guys. I know Dante Fowler is out there, and he had I think a 6 sack season. He'd be a little bit of a cheaper option with familiarity with Kyle Shanahan, obviously from the days back in Atlanta. I think that there are a couple of guys like that, and I think that you could look to upgrade by getting those players who could be potential three-down kind of options. So that's kind of where I would probably look over a guy who is a very good pass rusher for sure, but not necessarily the best run defender if I'm going to spend a significant amount of money towards it.
Now, somebody that your boy Marco brought up, well, I should say our boy, right now, Washington is not sure they're going to pick up the 5th-year option on Chase Young.
Oh, Chase Young.
So can you explain a little bit about what not picking up the 5th-year option means to a team, and how could the 49ers maybe utilize him? Would that be somebody you would look at trying to bring in? And if that is somebody, how would the 49ers bring him in?
Yeah, so Chase Young obviously was a first round pick in 2020, Brandon Ayuk's class. So I know this report is coming because Ron Rivera was like, he essentially said he didn't give a firm response on whether he'd pick up the 5th-year option or not. And so to me, I think that the way that, I mean, if you're going to get Chase Young, it's if they decline the 5th-year option, you can get him because he's on a 1-year deal, a 1-year rental, and you don't know if the Commanders are going to obviously want to keep him long term. To me, I don't know how realistic that is, but the 49ers could look to trade for him with 1 year left on his contract if that 5th-year option's not picked up. It would be around a salary of $9 million or so. I'd assume maybe $10 million. I'm not exactly sure what Young's salary is at the moment, but it'd be around the range of $9 to $10 million. I think it'd be intriguing. Young certainly has a lot of potential. I just don't think the Commanders move him. I think that they'd be more so looking to, if they decline the 5th-year option, see how his 4th year goes and then franchise tag him if they can't reach a deal at the end of the year.
Okay. So basically, you're looking at Payne, Hargraves, and that's it. Like, there's not another player that you're excited about that could be the splurge on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think that though, if we're talking about candidates that I'd pay significant money to, meaning in excess of 15 million per year to, like the 49ers paid Travarius Ward. Those would be the guys. It's not that I wouldn't be excited about other guys. Like last year, Travarius Ward was. I know a lot of people like Stephon Gilmore. I like the Ward signing a lot more. I thought that the Ward signing was because he's 25. Gilmore's 33, and the Ward, when you look at his contract, it was really team friendly in terms of the way that it was structured, in terms of the guaranteed money and things like that. So I do think that it's interesting. I see Scott here bringing up Dalvin Tomlinson. Tomlinson could be interesting because I don't think Tomlinson's going to cost. Oh shoot, I don't think Dalvin Tomlinson's going to cost a lot of money this offseason. So that's why he could be an intriguing defensive tackle guy to pick up. I do know that he's had some sack, not sack, pass rush kind of woos in a way. He's more of a run stopper, but that's kind of what you want at times with those defensive linemen. And I think that he could definitely be a guy who the 49ers look for. And he's a high energy guy. The 49ers will like that. And he can be a nose tackle, but I'd assume plays probably better in the
But
three
we're talking splurge. So Deron
Yeah.
Payne is there. So let's say they strike out on defensive line, right? They still have this $15 million that they're trying to give away, right? So who can we get that'll make an impact? I have a name.
Go for it.
He was a former Saint, most recently played for the Eagles. Safety, CJ Gardner, man. Like, what do you think about him if they can't bring in a guy like Deron Payne, knowing that Steve Wilks is there, right? So Steve Wilks obviously is a secondary. He's more known for his expertise in the secondary. Obviously, we have Hufanga there locked in. Gibson is still questioning whether he wants to retire. It seems like you can't. If he does stay, he'll probably be with the 49ers for a one-year deal. And obviously, he played really, really well this season as well. But a guy like CJ Gardner, still pretty young, obviously is going to be commanding some big money. Great tackler out of the safety position. I would say probably better at, he reminds me of kind of what Jimmy Ward was able to bring. Somebody that could cover a little bit better, can be moved into the slot if you need him to. What do you think about him if they can't? Because I think both of us are on the same page. Obviously, number one is going to be Deron Payne. If they can't get Deron Payne, what would you say about splurging and getting CJ Gardner?
I would like the move. I just don't. Again, it's about the realisticness. The 49ers have shown that they're not a team that really likes to pay safeties that much. We've seen it with Jaquiski Tart. They didn't want to pay him. We've seen it now with Jimmy Ward, how they've lowballed him a couple of times. Remember, Jimmy Ward he got more money from the then Oakland Raiders in 2020. He chose to sign for less money with the 49ers, took a pay cut, and signed for a deal under $10 million a year in 2020. And now they tried to lowball him again. I don't know how much the 49ers would look to spend at a safety, but I do like the idea because obviously Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is a guy who's versatile. He's a guy who can play in the nickel. He can be a big nickel, but he can also play safety. And the 49ers like these type of players, especially Steve Wilks. I'm sure he's going to like it playing that robber role alongside Talanoa Hufanga. They can have interchangeable safeties. I think that those that definitely could provide intrigue. It's just, what's the contract that Gardner-Johnson's going to want? Obviously everyone's going to want him, but I think Jesse Bates would obviously be a huge splurge. I would not mind Jesse Bates on the 49ers, obviously, but I don't know how much the 49ers are going to look to spend money at the safety position, although it's certainly an intriguing option. I think they could, though, look towards the draft instead.
Do you think the bringing in of a guy like Wilks changes what they do in free agency as far as that? Whereas,
go for it.
I was just saying, because he's more of a secondary mind, and like I said, I think Shanahan and Lynch always are going to go after defensive line first. That's where their bread and butter is as well. But knowing that there isn't a lot of options at defensive line worthy of splurging on, right? So there's a few options. Let's say they miss on those. Do you think that? Because I don't. I think the little pushback that I would say is last year. I don't think any of us would have thought that they would have splurged on a corner because their
Uh,
history up until that point. When have they paid a corner $14 million?
Richard Sherman. They paid him 339.
Okay, but what I'm saying
But
is that
I get what you mean. I get what you mean. Like breaking precedent in a way. To
yeah,
me, to
yeah. I
me.
don't.
Mhm.
I don't. Richard Sherman was 339, but I don't. They with the deal that they gave, the deal that they gave. The deal that they gave Ward, I think, was a little bit bigger than
Yeah,
what we would have
342.
expected, right? And it
Mhm.
was something that we didn't expect. It's something that they didn't really do in the past, is what I'm saying. So who knows? I do think that there could be a chance that they that Wilkes wants more talent in the secondary. So
Mhm.
maybe they do go after a safety if they strike out on the defensive line. So I wouldn't put it out of the realm. I know that
I don't
it
think so. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
because I know that it hasn't been what they've done, but I also think I know a lot of the faithful doesn't believe this, but I do think that the team has shifted in some ways as far as what they do with personnel and things like that. So I think that they're willing to do that if they find a big enough need, especially because they have Hufunga there. So if they could get a guy like um Gardner Johnson, then their safety duo is set for some time. You know what I mean? Which is a really actually, especially if Lenore turns into who they want it to be, or they could get Mosley back, like that secondary is going to be set for at least 2 or 3 years, which is something that I think the team would like. You know, to not have to think about upgrading your secondary. You kind of just have one continuity for the next 2 3 years.
I think that they definitely like it. I think I definitely won't push it out of the realm. I think corner it was more a little more expected than a safety maybe this year, but I still think that safety is not out of the realm. As for those schematic part, because you talked about Wilkes, there are two parts that I want to mention. I think that they should prioritize defensive line with Wilkes's defensive scheme because Wilkes is aggressive. He likes to call blitzes. He likes to kind of ride with his defensive linemen, and that's why because he trusts his scheme with the way that his back end works. But he also needs unique players, and I think that's where the versatility comes in of a guy maybe like Chauncey Gardner Johnson, who can play several positions and also can take away certain parts of the field. So I think that it's certainly a possibility. I wouldn't mind it, and I think that if Tashawn Gibson does retire, as some do expect, I think that you could go for that and kind of solidify that position. I also think the 49ers would be intrigued by several players in the draft at safety. This is a very deep and a very solid safety class. We'll see where they go in that range, but I think that it's an intriguing idea for sure.
So where if you had to pick right now and bet money, what player do you think they bring in this free agency? What's that splurge? The Charvarius Ward type splurge that they made last season. Who's that splurge this year as far as their ability to actually get a player based off of what the market's gonna say and need and fit?
Yeah, that's definitely a tough one, right? Because there's it's definitely an interesting free agency class, and the 49ers have several places where they could put their money, but you don't necessarily know if they will put their money. I think at the moment I'm gonna shy away from right tackle. I think that it seems like Colton McKivitz might be the guy. I think I've got to go where I'm thinking, and it's defensive tackle. Defensive line, defensive tackle specifically. I think that that's where they're going to look to put the money in. They were very interested in defensive linemen at the trade
Trade
deadline
deadline.
this year.
Mhm.
Deron Payne was a guy floated around in those talks as well, and I think that they have the interest in Deron Payne. And the reason that I'm intrigued specifically by Deron Payne is because of how the contract could be structured. Ark Armstead right now is your defensive tackle, really of the present. I think Payne can be the guy of the present and the future, and you kind of carry over from Armstead to Payne after Armstead's contract's done. I don't know if I personally would not touch Armstead's contract anymore. You've pushed back money already last year. I think you don't leave. You touch Fred Warner's contract. You can touch McCaffrey's contract, but not, and then Bosa's obviously, but not Armstead's. I think those are the three players you see get touched, but Armstead has 2 more years left on his deal. If you give Deron Payne a 4-year deal, or I'd say maybe a 4-year deal, I think that you could structure it to where the cap hits don't necessarily spike until the third and the fourth year. And so I think that that's where the 49ers could really maneuver, where they have a higher cap hit in the third and the fourth year and have lower ones in the first 2 years to absolve some of that money that essentially Ark Armstead's going to be worth. And I wouldn't be surprised also if they moved on from Ark Armstead next year. I know it's not necessarily a topic many are talking about, but I wouldn't be surprised if they move on via a trade or via an outright. Well, I don't know if it'd be a cut, but I wouldn't be surprised in that situation either, and they save 11 million there. But in a Payne contract, I think that the contract would be structured to where you don't spend like the cap hit is pretty low in the first year, but then increases as the years go on because salary cap will continue to increase. There's reports that within the next 3 years it could hit 250 million and things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the route they go and with the contract they give.
So there's a realistic path to where they could be able to give Bosa his contract and sign Deron Payne and have both of them on this defensive line at the same time.
I think so, yes, because when you think about it, right now they're going to shoulder Bosa and Armstead on these deals, but essentially you're going to replace Armstead's big contract where it's 20 million cap hit a year for the next 2 years, at least 20 million, and I think it's 23 and 25. You're going to essentially replace that with what Deron Payne's cap hit is, while getting the production that Deron Payne has. I think that this team is with the cap hit, with cap increasing year by year, and with the way that this team operates, I think you can afford having 2 big time defensive lineman contracts.
That'd be great. I mean, to me, I put it on Twitter, and it seems like most people are agreeing with it. I think Deron Payne is everybody's number one choice if we could get him, just based off of need and who's available and who I think would fit with this team the best. Deron Payne definitely would be that guy. So if we could get him, that'd be great. Lynch, if you're listening, Adam Peters, if you're listening, Shanahan, if you're listening, go out there. Parag, make it happen. Go out there and get Deron Payne, and let's get this defensive line back to where we expect it to. Can you tell me,
man,
before we leave, give me a dark horse free agent that the 49ers can look at that might come in and be able to solidify this team anywhere on the field. I have one name, so I'll let you go.
Okay, let me think about it. I want to hear you first. Let me think about it.
So my and I don't know if it's necessarily dark horse. It's somebody I've mentioned before, but with Steve Wilkes, I definitely think they're going to be bringing in some secondary help. Somebody that he played with in Cleveland when he was coaching Cleveland is Greedy Williams. Greedy Williams is a free agent. He's a good defensive back. He's great at tackling. Somebody who can play man and zone type of schemes. Familiar with Wilkes' scheme as well, and I think that's somebody that fits a need and somebody that probably could be affordable for the 49ers to bring in to bolster up this secondary, because I think a lot of people are depending on the 49ers bringing back Emmanuel Moseley, and I just think there's going to be a lot of competition out there for him based off of just the 49ers coaches being everywhere right now. So I think a guy like Greedy Williams could come in and compete with Lenoir for that second cornerback spot, or even maybe move Lenoir into that slot if that's where, if he could play there. Or I just think he'd be a great fit to have another veteran in there that could perform at a high level.
I think those are he's an interesting option. Greedy Williams, obviously, I think he'd benefit from a fresh start, and I mean the 49ers could provide that for sure in Steve Wilkes' scheme, in a scheme that he's known as well. I think for me, I think that I'll go with. There are a couple of positions where you talk about like the positions you might not be necessarily thinking. Tight end is one. There's a fairly solid tight end. Fairly solid tight end market this year in terms of who's on the free agency market. I think it's led by guys like Mike Gesicki. I know Austin Hooper's a free agent. Dalton Schultz might be the top guy. Evan Ingram. I think you could look for one of those guys. Tunyon's there as well, I believe, and Hayden Hurst. Like one of those 6 guys, I think you could look to see who can be that tight end number 2 for the 49ers, a better tight end 2, a guy who might fit their system a little better. I think that's the position where I'd be looking for. I think the 49ers' ideal plan at tight end would be, so you have Kittle, you have Charlie Warner. If you want to carry 4, you sign one of those top 6 and then draft a guy. If not, then you sign one of the guys to a deal, maybe not too much guaranteed money, but see on a 1-year deal to where it's a friendly scheme for them. And then you draft a guy and have those 2 compete for 10 and 3.
Yeah, I think definitely this is the year where the 49ers have to draft a tight end. I know we're kind of running out of time, but maybe next time we could talk about draft strategy and
Draft
go over
strategy is
that.
going to be fun, man. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about it on the next episode. But Suneil, it's been fun, man. A nice
Yeah,
hour.
man.
We got to talk about some free agency stuff. Glad to have you on the show. All of you guys in the chat dropping your comments on the free agents that we talked about. I appreciate you guys keeping the chat popping and keeping tuning in for the entire hour. Thank you guys so much. Any last thoughts, Suneil, before we head on out?
Nope. Just make sure you subscribe to both of our channels. And I know Rohan's getting more and more active streaming and things like that. You know, the goal is for me to do the same thing. So we love your support. Appreciate you jumping in.
Yes, sir. Stay tuned, guys, because we'll be back soon, and we'll be talking about the draft in that next episode. So stay tuned. Follow on with the Rohan Chakravarthi show. Be sure to check out So Real Sports Talk as well, because Suneil's doing good stuff with his channel as well. Suneil, you gotta take us with the outro, man.
Absolutely. Stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you very, very soon.
Yes, sir.